Super interesting topic. We are going to be talking about one of the most disrupting events in the IT industry, I would say, in recent times after the acquisition of VMware by Broadcom. What's been going on there? What are companies facing? What are the options? What should we be doing about it? We've got some great guests from some of our OpenInfra member companies, and we're going to get into all of the details. Thank you for joining us. Put your questions in the chat, whichever platform you're watching on, and let's have a really good discussion today. To set the stage, I want to mention that OpenInfra Live is brought to you by the members of the OpenInfra Foundation. We have great members from all over the world who support the work of our communities and open source in general. So thank you to all of our Platinum, Gold, and Silver members for supporting our work and our communities. VMware was a massive player in data centers and enterprises everywhere. Broadcom made a big acquisition of them last year and immediately started to change some of the licensing terms and pricing that customers were seeing. And this was, a big change for a lot of companies out there. I think that, as I said, it's a very disrupting change. Even if the prices didn't really go up, it created a lot of uncertainty for all of their customers. And we have heard about this from many organizations all over the world. The thing that I think has really been interesting for us in our community is we are seeing a real active shift away from VMware to alternatives, especially things like OpenStack and StarlingX, where organizations are kind of refocusing the way that they manage their data centers away from these proprietary platforms and choosing open. And if you look among our OpenInfra members, over 80% of our member companies have already had a customer inquire about moving from VMware to OpenStack, and over 60% of our members surveyed have actually already completed a migration. We have some of those companies here today who can talk about it and help us get through the details of what's driving this and how it's working. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. In addition to the work that's kind of going on directly with these companies and their customers, we've also been organizing as a community to help people do this and to share this information openly. There's a QR code here that will take you to a white paper. We've got some really great use cases. One of the ones that's gone into a lot of detail is Geico. Geico is a massive financial services company in the US, and they went through this migration. And as a great open source citizen, they have shared some of the things they've learned and the outcomes that they achieved through this. So it's really great to see stories like this. And as I said, our community has come together to really open up the discussion and the playbooks for enabling more companies to do this. So, that's it for setting the stage. Let's get into the discussion. I'm really excited to have 4 guests today. We have Michael Yatru from Canonical, Randy Bias from Mirantis, Josh Villarreal from Rackspace, and Paul Miller from Wind River. So thank you, folks, for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for having us, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan.
So I want to just start off with with kind of a real high level question here, which is what have you seen in your customer base in terms of the impact of these VMware licensing changes? What have you actually heard from your real world customers? And feel free to jump in, any of you.
I guess I'll kick it off, John. I think that what we've seen, both from industry analysts, where we've seen, Gartner data, for example, quoting that, 80% of VMware customers are looking for other options, right, to evaluate whether they can move off of that technology. The top 1% of their customer base, the largest deployment, 20% of them looking to leave. There's a lot of pressures that create that dynamic. And I think one of the things that we've seen is, after a while, you get comfortable with the technology that you have deployed in your data center, and the cost becomes absorbed by your business. But when you finally realize there are other options, especially where problems like support and services can be radically different experience. If you look at the speciality of training your staff on VMware, if you change to any other technology stack like OpenStack, you now suddenly go into a community that has a dramatically larger pool of experts that can come in, and companies, right, that can come and help you with that deployment. So we think these are some of the things affecting the customers that we talk with.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is that, as you said, there's a skills investment, there's a kind of an ecosystem investment that comes with that. So the fact that these companies are considering this, it shows really how disruptive these changes have been to push them, away from something that was probably not top of mind as the thing that they wanted to change at that time. Randy, it looked like you were about to
on that. I would love to comment on that a little bit. It's indeed that the acquisition and the subsequent changes have been a catalyst. I think that that's a very well documented fact. But in reality, we see essentially that this is actually in line with an existing trajectory. We have actually a large number of companies that we've been in discussions before those changes have been made, and they have all been in a path to find a more modern and more open, a more comprehensive way to run their infrastructure. So definitely an accelerant, but the underlying trend was there. It just needed a little bit of attention from a different angle.
Yeah, I think it's a two-parter. What we've seen with our customers is that the new de facto standard is go with, open source, they don't want vendor lock-in, et cetera, but they haven't done anything around kind of virtualization and kind of their VMware platforms, because enterprises tend to stick with their existing vendors because of momentum, relationships, kind of, they know the procurement process, they know what they get, and there has to be some kind of tectonic shift, and they're Broadcom, and then they're willing to start thinking about alternatives. And the first thing they do is they think less about a commercial alternative. They think about an open, no lock-in, open source based solution. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Michael as well. The frequency at which we're seeing companies want to explore alternatives has been accelerated. I think a lot of them are asking us, where to take the first bite of the apple. Like, where do I start? A lot of these companies are looking for help defining the vision so they can put a plan together, and then you can really dig into the details. But I think until you understand your situation and the options that you have that you can choose from, it's hard to make a step forward. But the frequency is gone off the charts.
So let me follow up on that, Josh. Where do you start? If that's the jumping off point. Okay, I need to look at other options. Where do I start? What's the answer for that?
It's find a trusted advisor. Find someone that has done this before or helped organizations make this leap. I think the experience brings comfort for a lot of these customers that feel like, hey, I haven't had to change in the last decade or the better part of it. So entrusting your path or the direction you take to a trusted advisor, I think, is a key component of being successful in it. Because there's a lot of FUD out there as well. There's a lot of articles that say, hey, it's daunting or it's scary or it's going to be expensive. And I think that's a subjective position, right? And so you really need to talk to an advisor that can help you evaluate your situation and which bite to take first. Yeah.
Okay. I want to circle back to something that Michael and Randy, you both mentioned, which was around a trend towards choosing open. That's definitely something we see in a lot of areas. If you follow AI, then you might have heard of DeepSeek recently, that came out and really shook up the entire AI space. And now it seems like every couple of hours a new open source model drops. What do you think about the open source nature of these types of technologies? Is this underlying trend? Like why does that matter to people? What's driving the interest in that?
So
I think, go ahead,
Michael. Okay. So what I saw, what I've seen for a long time is that there are these very weird relationships between traditional commercial software, enterprise software vendors, and the largest enterprises. I remember being at a large telco in the cloud scaling days, early OpenStack days, and they were relating how they were renewing their Oracle licenses, their annual enterprise software license agreement for $100 million. If you spend 10 years sending Oracle $100 million, you could have bought a database company for that kind of money, right? And so there's a certain level of uncomfortability I saw with Oracle, with VMware, and with these other large enterprise vendors. And really, a lot of the biggest companies, I saw that they wanted to control the relationship, but they felt that they were being controlled in the relationship. And at the end of the day, that always felt like kind of the center of what was driving their interest around open source.
So this is the freedom element of open source that's appealing there.
Yeah, I think with open source, we get crowdsourced innovation from multiple directions, multiple industries, multiple companies like the ones represented here. And that drives the technology forward at an incredible pace. If we look at, even the website that the Open Infrastructure Foundation has put up for VMware migration to OpenStack, it's incredible. Look at the level of functionality the open source community has built. And I think once companies start looking into technologies like OpenStack and StarlingX, they realize it's fully capable of, solving the business problems that they need, doing high-scale virtual machine and container hosting, multi-tenancy, large-scale storage. All these things are possible, and the advantages that VMware might have once had over open source are no longer there, right? And people can really solve the problems with open source solutions in ways that they could not before.
Adaptability is another key issue that everyone has to face. The pace of technology, the example of LLMs and the explosion there only grows. And the ability to come up with composable solutions that can mutate and can adapt to accommodate new needs and new directions is very important. And in order to be able to do that, you need open standards. You need to have open standards, open implementations, straightforward integrations with well-understood patterns through well-defined APIs. And all of these are characteristics that if you look at the more traditional proprietary software, is not top of mind, right? It's nice to have some of them reach a maturity level to be able to accommodate them, but it's actually part of the DNA of open source. Like open source is what it is because of that openness, that composability, and that extensibility. So I think that gives people a sense that they're going to make a choice now. It's not necessarily a trivial choice, but that choice is going to open multiple doors for them in the future.
Yeah, and you said it's not a trivial choice, and it I think that's true. That flexibility and the extensibility, they do create questions that have to be answered. And I think, to Josh's point, making sure that you're working with a good partner who can help you down that path is really important. I think some of the questions that we've heard are, how do you map VMware capabilities to OpenStack or open source, a set of open source tools in general? Can you talk a little bit about that? How do we bring together the full suite of capabilities that people need to replace with an open source stack?
I'll jump in. I think there is a lot of choices that have been made in small companies up to large enterprises over the last 25 years, and they have crystallized to the current state of affairs. It's the same state of affairs that has led to a massive adoption of public clouds and the like. So this is essentially a pivotal moment. It's a great opportunity to take a first principles approach to the next step rather than just trying to match one-for-one checkboxes on solutions. So it's an opportunity to really map the internal needs that organizations have, project them forward into where things need to be able to go, and then again, leveraging the composability and the ability to bring an opinionated view of what you really need out of the OpenStack ecosystem. What do you really need from the StarlingX ecosystem, right? What are the right choices? Bring the expertise that can catalyze those choices. And now move forward with a platform that just doesn't try to carbon replicate what was previously in place, but actually build the foundation that will be able to, number one, accommodate business as usual that has been running so long, and number two, be able to provide that adaptability for the ever-present future needs.
I think
So
Michael raises. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Randy.
So I've actually done the mapping for a customer from the VMware capabilities to the OpenStack capabilities, and there's a one-for-one for the most part. The problem that I saw was more kind of around organizational inertia. And so there was more fear that would their VMware administrators be able to run something like OpenStack than there was about being able to get from VMware to OpenStack. And so I think that's a place where just educating customers and letting them know about the incredible resources that are around something as mature as OpenStack in terms of training options and the things that they need to do so that they can level up their VMware administrators is where we can win.
We've done the same. We've mapped features from OpenStack and VMware because customers ask for it out the gate. First question is, are all the same features in OpenStack that are in VMware? And that's how the conversation starts. But it usually ends finding out that they don't need every single one of those features. And so it's a much more consolidated discussion about what outcomes are you trying to achieve? And then here's how you can do that with open source, OpenStack. And I think the conversation gets much lighter because at the front of it, it's seemingly heavy, but I think that is a ruse, right? And customers really need to dig into what's important to their business and their workflow.
Yeah, I think
Paul, you were going to add something here.
Yeah, I think I mean the points being made here are dead on, right? We've got one dynamic where you look at the capabilities line by line, a la carte, vSphere, ESXi, NSX. You look for all those capabilities, and you'll find matching capabilities in OpenStack. But it's really about getting the company off of that laundry list kind of approach and saying, well, what's your actual problem that you're trying to deploy? Do you have multi-tenancy, high scale needs? Do you have multiple data centers? What's your storage situation? Talk to the actual problem, and you'll find that the OpenStack technology and Kubernetes and things like StarlingX can solve those problems completely, right? And so we really try to guide the customer from look, I'm trying to replace my VMware XYZ capabilities to what's your actual deployment problem and how can we move to that? Because like Josh and Michael said, you're actually moving to a much more modern technology set that's being moved forward by an open source community. And you may find that when you change the way you think about your infrastructure, you're actually going to have a better infrastructure than you had with the proprietary solution. And Randy's points are great as well, where you've got concerns from the IT and enterprise departments that have to manage this infrastructure, and they've trained their people, and the people are used to the way VMware works. They're going to have to move to a different management environment, a different architecture. But once they've done that, they've now jumped into an open source community that's huge with multiple companies. They've got different commercial options that they can use to satisfy that. They can even move between vendors if they want. And the training that they've put their people into now is now portable, whereas the training they've done with VMware is only useful for a single company, right? So I think people are really starting to see the shift that's possible here.
Mm-hmm. So you said that in some ways it's better. It's a better infrastructure that you can end up with through this. You talked a little bit about the open source aspects. One of the things that I've heard some companies talk about is also just moving to something that's kind of more modernized infrastructure. That's more that's less just virtualization of IT resources and more actual cloud. More cloud native kind of management of of the resources, which lets them move faster and make their developers happy and everything. Have any of you seen that or heard that as well from your customers?
I'll jump in and say that it's very interesting how many discussions go from, let's talk about a replacement of our current VMware infrastructure, to let's talk about hybrid cloud. And I think this is indicative of the appetite that exists out there, wherever possible, to be able to bring that capability for elasticity, when at the same time you can accommodate a first-class cloud-like experience that is based on a cost structure that is on-prem, with all the compliance requirements that you might have, with all the sensitivities that perhaps organizations have around that. And they're able to essentially think about abstraction layers that they can give them that portability in their on-prem and hybrid cloud operations, while at the same time they adopt not just new virtualization modes, but new ways to think about application rollouts, serverless containers, and the like. So I think that's again an indication, a strong indication that people are taking this point in time to actually think forward.
Well, you remember my shtick from the early days, Jonathan, where I was always talking about, hey, cloud's just about cloud native apps, scale out, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't really make sense for legacy workloads. And then OpenStack matured and added a bunch of features that put it on parity with VMware. So why wouldn't you want to move from sort of like virtualization silos to a modern cloud infrastructure where you can get all of what you had before, all of what you can have for kind of the future, and get the best of both worlds? I mean, then you got a single platform rather than just thinking kind of in like the old staid ways that you have in the past.
Yeah, we've heard customers ask or mention that they had a 3-year strategy to move toward containers, but they hadn't really explored how they were going to make that possible. I think OpenStack provides that lily pad, if you will, or that transition to help them, keep some of that legacy workload around and deal with it later or refactor it later, but also to explore how they can embark on that container strategy at the same time. So I think this proves to be a good opportunity for the transition, right, from something they've been leaning on, the virtualization or VMware for the last 5-10 years.
I think also, in open source based solutions, like we're talking about, people have access to the very latest technology, right? This is where, a lot of the open source developers are passionate and they pour their intellectual property into the open source community to build these things. But we also can't forget, what's important to a lot of enterprises is stability of their infrastructure. It's a lot of mission critical assets for them that they run their business on. And, I can certainly say from our experience with OpenStack and StarlingX, we have deployments with literally tens of thousands of nodes that have in excess of 6 nines performance. The open source technology is very, very strong now. It's very stable. It's very feature rich, as we've been talking about, but it's trustable, right? You can run your enterprise on this and feel safe to do so.
Perhaps I can inject a bit of an anecdote that we have. Of course, with Paul, we have lots of experience in the telco space specifically, as well as in other spaces. But I wanted to point out that some of the most mission critical services that not just people, but states and, government level organizations rely on are indeed running on open source today. So I think that there's a huge iceberg under the surface that for people that for a long time they had on their binoculars just proprietary virtualization solutions, they haven't seen it yet, but it's there and it's powering the most important pillars of our civilization, I would say.
Yeah, you definitely see a kind of a aha moment when customers that haven't been focused on exploring other options, when they do now and they find out that we have customers. One has a $500 million mission critical app. They've been running on OpenStack for the last 7+ years. We released a case study recently where we dug into that a bit, but I think there's plenty of mission critical apps running on OpenStack and have been doing so for years. And so I think for new companies, organizations exploring alternatives, look out for those examples because they're out there, and that might bring a little more comfort.
Yes, and just a little pitch for some of the work that we do at the foundation. We love to get those stories and hear those stories. And if you are a user of these OpenInfra technologies and want to share that with the community, reach out to us, because we love to talk about the success that our community has in these kinds of mission critical workloads and with these big production apps. I want to go to a question now from LinkedIn here. What is the biggest misperception about migrating workloads from VMware to OpenStack? We've talked about some of the the technology mapping and those kinds of things, but what are you all seeing as a misperception that people are approaching this with?
From my end, I think for Jimmy here, cost and complexity, people are misjudging, right, how complex this is. Moving in VMs and containers and applications and data between systems is not the most complex thing in the world. You certainly may have engagement for services to help with migration and tooling that's necessary to do that, but it's very doable, right? This is not something to be afraid of. But we see customers often they've got their infrastructure built and they're all running their virtual machines that are mission critical services for their business, and they're worried about moving them, right? They're just worried about moving that. Are they going to lose data? Are they going to have downtime? These are the real problems of migration. But obviously, the commercial benefits for them that we've been talking about through this whole conversation are so powerful that I think we've seen the beginning of a tsunami here that's unstoppable. Once the industry has really opened the lid on this and understood what their options are, they're going to do it. And the CFOs in these businesses are going to push their IT departments to move in this way. But it's really critical, as multiple people here have been saying, find a good partner that understands how to do this, understands the complexities, can offer you the services and tooling that you need to make that migration and carry on with it, right? You've got to get the customer comfortable that they can actually achieve this successfully.
Any other?
Once upon a time, this was really difficult, right? VMware and Citrix had very different hypervisors, and then along came KVM and the Intel VT instruction set, and basically all the hypervisors standardized. And then we started putting VirtIO and the other paravirtualization drivers inside all the VMs, and that all got standardized and open sourced. And so now, like the what it takes to take a VM and move it from any of the virtualization solutions from one to another is incredibly trivial. It's minutes of work and almost zero downtime.
I think another misconception too is that you need to migrate every VM that you have now over. It's probably a good time to have some inspection and evaluate, do you really need to move everything? So that some good house cleaning. I moved houses last summer, and it was a good opportunity for me to purge some stuff that I've built up over a decade there. But the thinking that I had to move everything was a misconception. I think the same is true on this journey from VMware.
I'll add quickly that we're seeing kind of in a parallel way, a lot of CIOs looking at moving from public cloud infrastructure into private cloud. That's a bit harder, right? When you look at sometimes these applications become dependent upon the services that an AWS provides or whatever. And so when they try to migrate to a private cloud, that's very painful. But moving from a private cloud to a private cloud, as Randy was talking about, whether it be VMware or otherwise, is very straightforward.
Security is something that is a little bit of a leftover of a previous era and a previous fear, uncertainty, and doubt campaign. How can we achieve the same levels of security with open source? And I think that at this point, there's a good understanding, and there is a lot of proof points out there that showcase that open source in general is more secure than closed source solutions, that there are vendors that provide all of the security patches and fixes in a timely manner. And then going level up that stack, that compliance, whether it is against CIS benchmarks type of compliance or in a more federal focused DoD, DISA-STIC type of compliance. These are all levels of compliance that are achievable with OpenStack and open source solutions. And there is strong coverage for all of the day two needs around security.
So you've touched on a lot of like the technology and organizational aspects. What about the economics? There's an Ars Technica article that talked about how it could be very expensive to migrate a VM off of VMware. I think they're saying $5,000 per VM. Is this what you're seeing? Is the expense high? Is it lower than that? Is it worth it? Is it how do people think about the economics? Because we're talking about businesses and obviously it is going to be a huge aspect of their evaluation of a move like this.
A TCO model for that type of migration, I think it's much more appropriate when you actually amortize the costs for that include everything, the migration as well as the ongoing cost to a properly open source solution versus the recurring costs of licensing and maintenance from a proprietary one. I think that if you have a holistic analysis and even a 3-year amortization approach, it becomes very quickly obvious that the TCO of an OpenStack-based, an open source-based solution is much more compelling. So you're getting essentially a multiplier for your spending in terms of the technology that you get access to and the ability to do new things too, right? For the same all-inclusive TCO, you can actually take your technology stack at least one generation forward.
Well, Jonathan, what's the cost of being locked in more? Broadcom could change the pricing again and next year, right? Like what is the cost to stay? Right.
That would be a multiplier.
Broadcom's already signaled they only care about this percentage, this tiny percentage of VMware customers, right? You're basically allowing them to sit there and choke you by the throat. So is that where you want to be?
There's a lot of new tooling out there. That is more modest in price than the article that was mentioned, $5,000 a VM, a few $100. There's a lot of no-touch options. It really depends on your situation. But I think another thing that impacts the cost is the duration of time that you're spending doing these migrations. So again, having a good partner accelerates that. We're seeing some customers move hundreds of VMs a day, and it's a buyer's market. So there's a lot of incentives out there. If you're moving off VMware and replatforming, there's a lot of incentives that are being offered. We have an AMP program that offsets some of that cost. So at a more macro level, these incentives, commercial incentives that customers can get when they migrate, can be applied toward those migration costs, and that reduces the overall cost. But I think the market's accepting of some opportunity, and those incentives are real. There's tons of them out there.
Yeah, and Josh, we got a question from YouTube from George Carl. Maybe we can pull that one up here. That you sort of touched on, but I would love to hear everybody's take on this. What are some of the best tools to migrate my VMware workload to OpenStack? Are there options out there for folks who are who are wanting to do this that really help with the technical steps of that migration?
Yeah, two. I'll just jump in real quick and offer a couple that we use, but two top of mind are Cloud-Based Solutions has a tool called Coriolis. It's very useful. Storeware has an option as well that we find extremely useful. We have some homegrown options, and there's quite a bit out there The jailbreak is another, but there's starting to be a multitude of tools out there to be used.
Mm-hmm.
I will also,
I mean, there's so many tools. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will also throw in the option. We have concluded successful migrations with a number of customers that ended up making the choice not to use the third-party proprietary tools. We are working with many of the options that have been already mentioned. But in reality, when you have a good understanding about your infrastructure, and again, your mileage will vary, there are simple, straightforward, open source based solutions that they can be very quickly utilized in-house to perform that type of migration. So I would say that there's a little bit of an exploration that we typically do with the customer to understand their estate, to understand the requirements for the migration, the dependencies around the migration, and find what is the right combination of open source or otherwise tools to achieve the desirable goals.
Yeah, I'll also add that there's a lot of great tools out there, but nothing replaces the expertise of somebody to come alongside you and help you do it, right? The services and the skills of the personnel are actually what's really most key. So we tend to approach it more as a services action that we support with the tooling, right? Versus trying to sell the tooling to a customer or something like that. One of the reasons for that is the migration tooling is an interesting animal in that it's only run during migration and then the customer never sees it again, right? So it's kind of one of those tools that when you run once, oh, it misses a few of these cases. You go to the next customer, you run it again. Now it misses some other cases. It's not perfect, right? It's very good and it's very helpful, but that's why we think it's a services-led type of activity, right?
I mean, I think that's a good point because you got to remember that it's not about migrating VMs. It's about migrating apps, which are multiple VMs. So you've got to think about dependencies. You've got to think about doing data synchronization. You've got to have sort of a plan. You can go from the open source tools, which are great for sort of doing cold migrations, all the way up to the commercial tools. I better plug Mirantis has a migration tool, or I'll get in trouble. That allow you to kind of like basically do, warm migrations or hot migrations, live migrations of actual live workloads for an application that's composed of multiple virtual machines.
Well, I definitely plug your tools and your services. That actually is a great segue into another question that we got on LinkedIn here. One of the most concerning issues for most customers is the paradigm changes. Where you surely can have an OpenStack provider with Red Hat or Ubuntu, but usually you rather go on your own. So you're switching habits from, oh, I've got an issue, let's call VMware, to, oh, I've got an issue, I'll have to solve it with my team, my own knowledge, community communication endpoints, email list, IRC. I think this is a really interesting question to me because I have had this exact conversation multiple times with folks who think that in order to kind of properly adopt an open source technology, you have to basically become an upstream software developer on that technology to really be able to run it and rely on it. But I think what I would love to hear from all of you, because you are in the business of being the person that customers and users can call when they have a problem. There's not it's not an either or option. You really can get the benefits of like that broader ecosystem, like we were talking about earlier, but you can still have that kind of that call, that support system, that professionalization there. How do you all approach that and talk about that with your customers?
This is very interesting. We have a very wide customer base, but also an even wider community base. Mm-hmm. And it's a very common pattern. We see bright engineers that they look at the technology and they're ready to pretty much charge that hill on their own. And it's definitely a valiant effort. And then we have to have discussions that are kind of geared towards the business expectations and the business requirements and the business risks around that. And very quickly, it becomes obvious that these risks are not really advisable or don't really make sense from a cost perspective to be internalized. So that's essentially where the vendor ecosystem comes into play. And this is essentially the amazing synergy between not having a vendor login and at the same time not being alone, right? Even if you're part of a community, you have to navigate that community that's not necessarily timely, that's not necessarily straightforward, that's not necessarily easy. So a vendor comes in again as a mechanism to assist whenever additional expertise is needed, when a virtual team needs to surround a specific problem in order to find an accelerated solution, whenever support is needed. In some situations, we find that the onboarding that is necessary for a customer to go from their existing infrastructure to a new open source, OpenStack based, it's something that they simply do not have the capacity to do in-house. And for example, as another layer, we bring in managed services. So we take on the responsibility to run their OpenStack in their own premises with, again, all the compliance and all the requirements that they might have, and give them the necessary breather to go through the migration, to prove the level of automation that the new platform can give them, to essentially materialize the benefits in terms of an ROI to the business. And then when they're ready, when they have gone through additional training, they can pretty much take on the management of that environment. So support, managed services, consultation, this is essentially the bread and butter that we can bring in to make sure that the business is fully supported and all the typical risks are mitigated.
I think one of the things I've seen specific to that LinkedIn question is this is really the discussion about roll your own or commercially supported version of OpenStack. And if you're moving from VMware and you're thinking of rolling your own because of cost basis, the cost basis delta from moving to VMware to one of our companies here, Provided Solutions, is so great that incremental step that you think that you're getting from moving to a fully self-supported version, it's actually quite an illusion. And usually that type of roll your own approach, that customer probably hasn't done a TCO analysis, right? Because usually if you look at the amount of staff that they're going to have to wrap around this solution to replace what they're getting at from a low-cost support option, and then the complexities of that, are they going to be able to implement CVE patches in order to maintain cybersecurity risk in their enterprises? They've got to step up to all of those capabilities that the companies that are on this call can provide to them for quite a moderate cost. So usually that TCO and risk analysis has not been run. Now, of course, there are folks that will run a pure open source solution, and that's great, that's fine. But we tend to see in our customer base anyhow, enterprises that are running infrastructure that are critical to their business are not going to take that risk and cost. It's actually more expensive.
I was in a briefing with a customer that is a longtime VMware user, and they were exploring making the transition off of VMware. At the end of the conversation, one of the leaders at this organization said, I have an interesting question, but who does Rackspace call when when you have an issue or you can't figure something out? And if you could tell that this was a dynamic change that they would have to embrace in moving towards open source solutions. And I said, well, something that our customers that migrate to OpenStack will come to know is that there's a very strong community that we lean into that collaborates, shares the know-how, but that ultimately is part of the success and what helps us keep up with the pace of technology. We offer something called a build, operate, transfer. So it's if you want to do it on your own, I'm with Paul, doing it out the gate on your own and making such a massive change might end up being more expensive, but partnering with someone that can help you get into a good rhythm and then transfer it back once you've built up the skills, built up the capability, I think is another way to segue off of VMware and to move to something like OpenStack successfully.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a weird question, Jonathan, if you step back and think about it, right? And here's why. Every single technology business, and now every business is a technology business, has some secret sauce somewhere. They have some software somewhere. who do they call when that software breaks? They call themselves. It might be closed source, right? It's really about where you decide to apply resources. And almost nobody that I know goes and runs open source without having a vendor to support them. It just doesn't make any sense. But in some cases, I have seen people who wanted to take OpenStack and basically run it themselves. They chose to do that, but they had a strategic reason. Walmart is an example of that, right? So, you know, I think it's just more important to think about, where do you want to spend your ducats? Like what's strategically important for your business?
Yeah, and I think that the theme that I'm getting from all of you here is that one of the this is another one of those strengths of open source options and OpenStack and StarlingX, is that there's a range of choices that companies can make for what fits them best. You know, if this infrastructure is a an important component of their business, but one of many components, and they don't want to really have to become an expert in it. They don't have to become an expert in it. They can find a partner and get a very seamless experience. If this is something that they are really building into the fabric of their business in a strategic way, then they probably want to have a higher level of expertise internally and, you know, be able to handle most of it themselves, but still, you know, have commercial options when needed. And I think, yeah, that continuum of things is great. There's been some interesting comments happening in the chat. There's one that I was just going to mention here from Matu, where he says the migration is not about moving live workloads from one cloud to another. It's really a big new world change. And I think that echoes some of what you all were talking about, where the migration is not just how do I get the bits from running in this VM to this VM, but it's also how do I migrate, you know, my people and my operations mindset and all of that over. So I think that's a great one.
That is good.
There's another question that I wanted to go to as well, from Magnus, which is, you know, this is, I think, a really good baseline question here. We know that one of the strengths of the VMware ecosystem was a very large set of applications that people had a history of running there, things like Oracle, Datadog, et cetera. So, you know, Magnus's question is, can you spin up enterprise apps and run these in OpenStack environments?
I can offer a quick short answer to one of those, because it's extremely relevant for us. But absolutely, we partner with Datadog, and most of our customers have this built into our solution. I think this is something that will increase in pace, is onboarding of more integrations as more customers are making these changes. And I think that ecosystem will get stronger and stronger for it to be an easier landscape of seeing different apps that integrate with these open source solutions.
Yeah, I think the answer is absolutely yes to this question. I mean, just in the past few weeks, we brought over 60 different enterprise applications into OpenStack and Kubernetes environments like StarlingX. And we had no code change in the base platform to integrate and certify those applications. The capability of supporting enterprise applications is relatively straightforward in our technologies today. The area where we see difficulty is if people are using high performance specialized hardware accelerators or things like that. That tends to get a little trickier with driver integration, that sort of thing. But standard enterprise apps, they largely work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to jump off after that statement, Paul. That one of the things that newcomers to OpenStack sometimes forget is that it can encompass bare metal. So, for example, if you're looking at a heavyweight enterprise database, many people will decide actually to run that on a bare metal server, and you can have this single pane of glass through OpenStack Ironic, for example, and be able to integrate seamlessly both the enterprise applications that are appropriate to be used in a virtualization environment, as well as the ones that will benefit from a bare metal experience. And in the same vein, you can also think about acceleration capabilities around GPUs. It's possible, it's technically possible to enable some of them through typically PCI pass-through directly in virtualized environments as well as in bare metal. We're doing a lot of work with NVIDIA around DPU acceleration. So even for the more esoteric type of accelerators, there's a very clear path forward, and there's a lot of R&D that is taking place through partnerships and in the community to make sure that we get to a point that we can accommodate specialized needs.
I should add one more bit to my comment earlier, but not only are we seeing companies exploring moving off VMware to OpenStack, but we're also seeing organizations that have traditionally offered their services on VMware. They're hitting us up for test environments so they can work on integration of their apps, ones that are widely used, some very large names that are industry standards that are looking to get OpenStack under their umbrella. So I really do see this as an increasing landscape as well, not only the companies moving over their workloads.
Daniel on LinkedIn asked about GPU and DPU integration. Anyone want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think this is one thing that I can actually comment on the Open Infrastructure Foundation StarlingX project. One of the reasons why we created that project was having inbuilt support for the drivers and ecosystems for hardware accelerators. As some people know, that project was originally used a lot for virtual RAN and Open RAN deployment that uses very specialized hardware accelerators, and dealing with the complexities of managing driver updates and software updates across a very highly scaled cloud system becomes incredibly complex. And so we've actually added capabilities in that project to support directly GPU and DPU integration on those platforms with the driver support for updates and management of them. So that's a very important thing. It's one thing to simply support the existence of the accelerator, but how do you manage the life cycle of it over time, right? The hardware comes with driver change over time.
Yeah. Well, I want to give each of you a chance to talk about your specific approach to migration. What customers can expect, and how you engage and help. Just because I do think that's a question that we get a lot at the foundation. So I'll start with you, Michael. For folks who are interested in doing this, kind of what's the approach with Canonical?
We have a structured professional services program that essentially we exercise to understand jointly with the customer their current state, their desired future state, and map out what does it take, not just technologically but organizationally, to bridge those two endpoints. That involves the potential of training to specific technologies, engagements around design and implementations, engagements around migration of workloads, and as well as I mentioned, the capability of providing an on-ramp to the new technology through managed services. So we explore the totality of that journey, of that transformation effectively through a very well-structured professional services engagement, and we can map out all the potential contingencies from there.
Okay, great. Paul, do you want to talk about Wind River and the approach for helping folks who want to look at VMware alternatives?
Yeah, so story starts about, I'd say 7 years ago now, when we co-founded the StarlingX project in the Open Infrastructure Foundation. And we felt it was really important to embrace this challenge with a completely open source based methodology. So our company upstreams 100% of every line of code that we do directly into the open source community. We really feel that's the right way to engage this particular market space. So we've now had 6+ years of deployment on that technology, and we created that technology stack and open source project because we saw some, this is like our conversation we've had today about, open source brings you to the most modern set of cloud capabilities. When we looked at existing cloud stacks, they couldn't handle a geo-separated multi-site deployment very well. They couldn't handle software upgrades. They in order to achieve high availability, they required an excessive amount of nodes, which drove TCO really high for different users. And there's a lot of attributes like that the open source community got together and flat out solved in StarlingX. And we're finding that as we perform VMware replacement, these are very attractive capabilities. If you're dropping TCO because you need less nodes, you can manage, for example, a hospital customer, they can manage multiple sites from a single pane of glass. There's some real operational advantages, right, with this technology that's been built in StarlingX. And so we take that open source project and we create a licensed binary that we call Wind River Studio Cloud Platform. And that's the product that we sell and support fully based on the open source project.
Okay. And Randy, what about with Mirantis?
I mean, we're like most of the other businesses here. We've got professional services, managed services. We can help you with all of that. I think the place where we shine is that we're still running some of the world's largest OpenStack deployments. Number one. Number two, we were the first to really put OpenStack on top of Kubernetes. So what we found is that that's really helped our customers in terms of upgrading from one version of OpenStack to another. As you know, I've got a long history before Mirantis with OpenStack. And one of the things I saw happen, especially in the early days, was very difficult to get somebody from one version of OpenStack up to the next version of OpenStack. And what we see right now is that Mirantis OpenStack, MOSC, we keep our customers within 2 to 3 releases of the bleeding edge, and they're able to do that without any interruption in services and so on. So I think that's the place where we really shine. Yeah.
Okay. And Josh, you mentioned earlier, you have a build,
operate, transfer.
Yes.
Yeah. BOT. So we have that. We have structured PS engagements as well. We call them cloud readiness assessments, but we'll go dig into your workloads, do some app rationalization, some TCO activities, give you some takeaways that help you kind of define your journey and know where to start, know where to take that first bite of the apple. We have build, operate, transfers, which is usually like a 1 to 2 year engagement where we'll help you jumpstart your transition to OpenStack, and then take the keys back with a bit of a kind of a co-pilot exercise where we'll be 2 in the box with you until you're ready to go, and also package in some education. But something else that we have that's quite unique, I think, is what we call elastic engineering. And so this is essentially an OpenStack engineer as a service. It's a pod of OpenStack experts with a lead architect. And this is packaged in a tier of hours on a monthly basis. And you can swing it up or swing it down on demand. And we help you kind of accelerate your backlog or do education activities to get you more expertise, or just jump in the box with you and help you operate your OpenStack clouds. And it gives a lot of flexibility to customers just to buy expertise without necessarily buying everything else.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is it's great to hear the approaches, the options. I think that we are we're still at the beginning of a transition here. I love earlier this morning, Paul, you said that it was unstoppable. So I hope that's what we see. More people moving to open solutions and open source technologies and really taking advantage of the big benefits there. Well, that is our time for this episode. So I want to say thank you very much to Michael, Paul, Randy, and Josh for joining us. I want to also thank all of the viewers who joined in as well. Especially thanks for the questions and comments. We love doing these OpenInfra Live shows like this, where we can have an interactive discussion and dive deep into various topics. So thanks everyone for participating. This episode will be posted on our channels. So if you didn't get to see the whole thing, you'll be able to go back and watch it. And a lot of resources in the links, including on the OpenInfra VMware migration page that can point you to a lot of strong resources to help you on your way. So thank you again to our guests. Thanks to our viewers. And I hope that everybody has a good time with OpenInfra.